What's up guys, Steven Spikes here, and today I'm going to be taking y'all further into the music theory behind Vultures by Arch Enemy. We're going to be getting into the verse, the pre-chorus, some of the main riffs, and we're going to be talking about what makes it sound so aggressive and powerful. It's coming up right now here on the Spike Signal. So last time we left, we had just got finished talking about the intro to Arch Enemy's song Vultures. Now we're going to go ahead and pick it up more or less right where we left off and going to be talking about the verse to start off with. So I want to go ahead and get us going from the vantage point of where we left off precisely. Now, for that, I'm going to go ahead and play just a little bit of where we stopped, where the tapping ends. So a couple things to start. Now, first of all, as you can see, before we were in the key, and it doesn't show here, but I'll just tell you, before we were in the key of A flat minor. Now, what Arch Enemy does here when they transition to the verse is they change keys entirely. They now go to C minor, and we can see that right here, 3 flats indicating C minor in this case. So we're now there, which makes sense because in this song, if I'm not mistaken, the tuning is actually in C standard anyways, or drop C, something like that though. So to have access to the minor note as the lowest note on the lowest string of the guitar, it's logical, it makes sense, it's done all over the place. So really sort of understandable there why they chose that approach. We're going to go ahead and start tearing this down. Let's go ahead and listen to it one more time just before it repeats. So I know when I first heard this song, I was like, wow, this sounds very kind of like aggressive, very kind of intense, almost kind of creepy, again, like I've said before and everything. And there's a couple things going on here to give it that sort of feel. So where are we starting out? Well, let's start with the first measure right here. So once again, the upper line is the bass guitar right here. So we're going to be drawing our implied chord forms from what the bass guitar is doing more or less. Although we will sometimes be making sort of tertiary interpretations based off of what's happening in higher registers of the song as well. So we start off right here. We can see very quickly the guitar is basically playing the F minor of C minor. And what that does is it gives us a sound that is ready to do some various things, like kind of in a darker fashion, because it's not a flat 6, it's not a flat 7, it's not a flat 3. It's starting on a minor chord. The guitar, as you can see as well, is basically doing harmonized thirds, more or less, with the pedal tone being the F as well. That is an F right there. If I can do it, that note is an F too. So throughout this entire part, actually, the pedal tone, and by pedal tone, I mean the lowest note being hit on the guitar, is always an F. Even when the implied chord forms change, as we'll see coming up here in a little bit, it's always an F. So that's an important thing to keep in mind right there. Now, the higher notes in the guitar lead lines are actually more or less following what the bass is doing as well. Here on this guitar, we can see that the sort of note that is pulled off to, so to speak, is an F. Always an F in this case, pulling off from the A, which would be the third of an F, to the F itself right here. This higher line still right here is harmonized in thirds to this one. So here is the lower lead line to this one. And these guitars are doing similar things. When this one is playing an F right here, this one is playing an A. When this one is playing an A, this one right here is playing a C. So following very closely, all very melodic for this measure, more or less, so to speak. But that'll change as soon as we get into the next measure. Okay, well, what happens there? Right instantly it sounds kind of darker. I'm going to go ahead and play it mostly all the way through. So pretty instantly, right after the first measure, like when I first heard this song, I was like, wow, you know, something outside of the key, something non-diatonic is going on here. What's happening? Here's what's happening. Well, basically, I didn't exactly interpret this in any specific kind of way. That's why I just put E dot dot dot. More or less, the bass is going to an E natural, and the lead lines are more or less following that as well. You have the same sort of idea here. This guitar right here, and that's this one. The pull off note, if you would, the note that is pulled off to, is playing an E natural as well. The right before that, it's playing the third of E natural, and this one is following along fairly closely as well, playing third harmonies to what this guitar right here is doing. Third higher than here, third higher than here. We can also see them drawing on this B natural, that more or less being from C harmonic minor, once again giving us that harmonic minor intense aggressive sound. So I have a couple things going on here to give you sort of like an aggressive feel to what's going on here. Overall, pretty cool deal. Let's go ahead and get into the next passage. We now move to this flat 3, and that should be a flat 3, not a B3. That doesn't make any sense. So E flat, that's the major chord, if you would, of C minor. So this is pretty straightforward. Doing the same sort of thing, you know, now we have an E flat instead of an E natural. So we now have E flats right here in the pull-off notes. Not going to spend too much time talking about that, but it's more or less the same idea. You have on one line notes being pulled off to the one of the implied chord, and then you have harmonized thirds to the top of that. So kind of what we saw before. Not going to talk about that too much more, but I do want to get into the next part. Okay, so you then have this sort of D-diminished section right here. Now this makes sense. This is within the key of C minor itself. The 2 is always diminished in a minor scale, in a natural minor scale, that is. So we have this D-diminished right here, shown by this 2 right here with a little star. That means it be diminished. So with that, we have this little movement. A little bit of a different thing, a little bit of a different rhythm, you know, kind of cool and such. But once again, you're pulling off to the Ds once again. And in this case, you actually are getting the flat 5. So these A's right here, if you can see that, would be the flat 5 to the D diminished. So you get a full sort of, and when I say full, I don't mean that in a technical sense, but you get the full range of the diminished sound here because you have the roots, you have roots being played here as well as the thirds. Then you have what is basically a third and the flat 5th being played up here. So cool stuff right there. Fully kind of spelling out in a metal fashion, fully spelling out the diminished chord. And once again, you know, for whatever reason, just always going back to those Fs, and all the pedal tones can be seen. We have just F after F after F. Once again, the F in the key of C minor is the 4. It's the 4. It'd be the Dorian note, if you would. And they're just going back to that. Sounds fine. Sounds cool. Interesting choice, but hey, it's all good. Let's go ahead and listen to this thing from the start one more time. So once again, you can hear the kind of aggression and the intensity, you know, so you start in the 2 and everything like that, or the 4 rather. You go down to that E natural, which is just more or less out of the key. You also got that stacked with a B natural, so kind of gives you a lot of non-melodic feeling right there. You then go to the flat 3, which is more or less within the key, which is fine, but then immediately you go to the D diminished, which once again, a great chord to go to if you want an aggressive, on edge, creepy, kind of intense, dark sound. And it's really achieved well. A dark sound and feel is achieved more or less completely throughout this verse right here. So let's go ahead and listen to it all the way through till we get to the next part. So there is a solo here. We'll be talking about the solo in a different video, but let's go ahead and keep going past it. All right, so we now get into the verses where the screaming comes in and such like that. So got some interesting things happening here. Let's listen to it all the way through, then we'll talk about it. So got some very, if you were looking at the implied chords up here, got some very weird stuff happening, you know? So I think I interpreted all of this fine. We start on the C minor to start off the verse, makes sense? We then go to just, it's basically a root and a flat 6. It's the C and it's flat 6 right there. Artists do this all the time. Buckethead all the time, like kind of does these weird sort of like versions of power chords that aren't perfect fifths, but sometimes it's 1 and a flat 6, 1 and a 4 and such like that. Other metal bands do it too. All you do is you basically move, whether it's your ring finger or your pinky, you move it up 1 fret from a power chord, and that's the shape that this gives you. Then right from there, you get into this, what I call as a B diminished flat 6. I think that'd be the best way to look at it. The B natural, once again, comes from the harmonic minor scale, so that's a natural 7, but you also have a flat 6 there because now at this point in time, you're moving your, what would be your pointer finger, if you're fingering the power chord with your pointer finger, of course, you'd move that down a fret. So now the distance between your chord, as can be seen right here, would in fact be a flat 6. Then you get over here to this chord, and you essentially, on top of that, are still playing a B, but as you can see here, specifically this note right here, the highlighted one that I'm moving my mouse around, that now is a natural 6. Once again, within the key, but it's not in C natural minor, but now instead in C harmonic minor. So all this is within the key of C harmonic minor, which gives it a very, very different feel. Then we get to the next part, and I'm going to play it from the start, and we'll get to the next part. Okay, so now, as you can see, we have right halfway through the verse what looks to be a key change. Maybe there's a different way to look at this. I was able to have it make the most sense to me by straight up viewing them as changing keys within the verse. So what we can see here, and I'm going to go ahead and pull out the circle of fifths really quick. That's right here. So again, before, for the main riff, the first riff we talked about, and for the very first part of the verse, we were right here in C minor, also drawing here and there from C harmonic minor as well. But now it's looking like we transition to B flat minor, which would be right here, best I can figure and everything. So basically going backwards, and this would be backwards because we're kind of going down and around, going counterclockwise, if you would, around the circle of fifths, moving from here to here, giving you a totally different feel. Now, we've talked about key changes in other songs that we've discussed prior. This is different than that because it sounds, instead of sounding kind of like a rising or empowering sort of feel like can happen other times when you key change to a distance of a major second like this is, this sounds very dark and intense and kind of grim almost. I'd probably equate that to, if I had to guess, not just necessarily transitioning from C minor to B flat minor, but C harmonic minor to B minor, potentially giving you a bit of that sound. And also just the interesting placement, like putting a transition like that smack in the middle of a verse probably kind of catches your ear in a way that's a little less sort of rising and empowering and more so kind of somber and dark and everything, which is the sense I get from hearing this song. So that's just a little bit about why I think that sounds the way it does. Let's go ahead and look at what's happening in B flat minor, and it'll look familiar. To a point, that is. So as we can see right over here, we more or less have the 1, the B flat minor. We then have a B flat minor flat 6, so the exact same sort of intervallic movement, if you would, going on there. And then what do? We once again, right here, borrow from the, well, now it'd be from the B flat harmonic minor in order to give us this A diminished with a 6 in it, and that should actually be a flat 6 if I'm not mistaken, but pretty much the exact same movement. Now, the weird part, which I honestly would be open to some elaboration on from anyone, is this F minor coming up here. You know, most of these notes right here are Fs. I didn't exactly know what to make of it. It was a little bit odd. I'm sure there could be someone that could elaborate on what's happening here better. We got some stuff going on from outside the key here. We got various things happening. We got some, you know, accidentals and such. A little bit hard for me to interpret exactly what's transpiring, but I think nonetheless it's probably just safe to assume that what they were doing here is just wanting to give something that's, once again, very aggressive, very kind of almost evil sounding, depending on what you're doing, especially in metal. Going outside the key using chromaticism can be a great way to make a song sound more aggressive and more brutal, and I'm thinking that's probably just something to the effect they're trying to do here. Though that's not to say there isn't something more theoretically complex happening here, so they think I think there is. I just wasn't able to figure it out. So if anyone does, let me know about it, because that'd be really cool. So gonna go ahead and play past this part. Now we have one more riff to talk about here, but before we get to that, let's listen to this whole part in its entirety, the whole verse. Let's try to listen to what the changes are and where they're happening. Harmonic minor, key change, weirdness right there. So now we're going to go into the next part. Now we transition back at this point, as can be seen right here, to C minor. We have, once again, 3 flats, and if we go back to our circle of fifths, we can see that 3 flats is associated with C minor right here. So let's go ahead and now listen to this part. I'm going to start a measure back. Okay, so this is similar to what happened before, but nonetheless different. So we go back to C minor. So we've gone from C to B flat to C minor, and now we're going to go ahead and jump right on back to C minor. This time, essentially doing kind of a little bit of a fast picking thing here. The pedal tones are more or less, if I'm not mistaken, lining up with exactly what the bass is doing in all cases, so we'll talk about that. And the rhythmic, or rather the sort of lead notes, the lead lines within this, if you would, are always harmonized to thirds, it appears. So that's the sort of general context of what's going on here. Beyond that, though, we have some interesting things happening. You go from the C to the B diminished. So automatically we're borrowing that, or not borrowing, but more so transitioning to the C harmonic minor once again, using the B. The B diminished is what the chord would be, because the natural 7 in a harmonic minor scale is a diminished, it's a diminished chord. Moving to the B flat. So now we're back at the flat 7 of C minor. Moving to the A, which you could honestly, in this case, you could honestly view this A right here, and I didn't notate it out here. You could view this potentially as drawing from the melodic minor scale, the C melodic minor scale. Now, what's the melodic minor scale? Just in case anyone isn't familiar with that. The harmonic minor scale, as we've discussed, is more or less a scale that has a natural 7, or not even a natural 7, but a sharp 7 to it in the case, in general terms. So what happens then is, if you're in a key like, say, A harmonic minor, what you're going to do there is you sharp the 7. So what that means now is that there is only a half step between the root note, which is A, and the what would be the flat 7 typically is now a natural 7, which is a G. So now G sharp to A, 1/2 step. That's it. The melodic minor scale is the same thing, except you also sharp the flat 6. Because remember, a natural minor scale, and I'm going to leave this up right here while I say it, a natural minor scale has several things that differentiate from a major scale. It has a flat 3, it has a flat 6, and it has a flat 7. So basically, the melodic minor scale goes ahead and removes 2 of those elements. It removes the flat 6 and makes it a natural 6, and it removes the flat 7 and makes it a natural 7. The only thing you have that's flat in a minor scale, or in a melodic minor scale, and flat I mean from the standpoint of like altering the natural minor, is the flat 3. That's the only thing. Aside from that, everything else is the same. Lots of different resources, if what I explained there wasn't totally clear, that you can look up, but the general impression that I get from this is that I would view this A as being that you'd say sharped, or in this case, it'd be a natural A, because there's typically an A flat here. It would be the natural A that is from the melodic minor. And that would actually, if that was in fact the case, that would actually be an A diminished, because in melodic minor, the 6, what becomes a natural 6 in this case, or a sharp 6 in most cases, you'd say, generally speaking, that's also diminished. So that's how you could interpret that, should you want to do that. And what you can view this thing as in whole is essentially moving from a note that all the minors share, C, to a note within the harmonic minor, back to the flat 7, which is a natural minor, back to the, in this case, natural 6, which is in the melodic minor. That movement overall gives you this very intense, very aggressive sound, because what is this also? What can you also view this as in a more simple fashion? Just a chromatic movement. You're going down 1 fret, down 1 fret, down 1 fret, down 1 fret. Another way to look at it. Chromatic movements are also a great way to cause a lot of aggression and intensity in the songs you're writing. As we can see, the guitar pedal tones are more or less doing the same thing. And you can see here on the tab even, down a fret, down a fret. Yeah. So yeah, and you have some other things happening too. You know, you have the natural right here. You also have this flat going on right here. It'd be a G flat on top of a B flat and such. So just all kinds of little tools being utilized in order to make the song sound aggressive and intense. You know, don't necessarily restrict yourself to one key. If you want a cohesive song, you should, but even in the most cohesive songs, there might be little elements of like non-diatonicness thrown in and such like that. And especially if you want something that's like incredibly aggressive and incredibly like kind of, you know, nails and intense and everything, you're going to want to do something like this a lot. You're going to want to take a lot of stuff out of the key and throw stuff all together and mix something up and get something dark out that you like, because that's the kind of general impression you get after looking at stuff like this. You get a very, very dark sound that's very, very cool. So from here, we actually do that weird little thing again. And then we go back to the main riff. Now, we're pretty much done with this section, but the thing that I want to do right now is go all the way back to the first part of the verse. And as we listen to it, let's pay attention to what chord forms are going on and what changes are being made and what movements are being made in order to make the song sound the way it does. Now, to do that, most of the places I should have this annotated, you can try to follow along up here to hear what's happening, to hear what kinds of chord changes and, you know, non-diatonic changes are done in order to make a song sound the way it does. So hopefully you can replicate it should you want to in your own stuff. So let's go ahead and listen to this whole section all the way through. Out of key, flat 3, diminished. Repeating. Moving to the verse, C minor, C harmonic minor, E flat minor key, E flat harmonic minor. Using the sharp 7 or the natural 7 in this case. Back in the key of C minor, melodic minor. Weird part. So yeah, being able to hear those sorts of things and immediately pick out those sorts of things, not maybe necessarily when you're listening to a song, but when you're writing a song and thinking, I can go here, I can go there to get a certain sound, is very important. These sorts of tools will allow you to sound a lot more like Arch Enemy in your writing if that's what you want to do, and give you the ability to make stuff different than what they do, while at the same time taking some of the notable elements and feelings from what they get and from what they write and integrating it into your stuff, whether all the time or just in certain elements where you really want to get stuff that sounds creepy, intense, heavy, whatever you want to call it. Main takeaways: using the harmonic minor scales, very, very important in order to get a dark, intense sound when you're writing this style of metal. Utilizing the melodic minor as well, almost in like a chromatic fashion in order to get different sounds, also very important if you want to get a little bit of a dark sound. And finally, just utilizing chromatic movements as seen in that pre-chorus, I believe it was, in order to give yourself a song that's very intense and aggressive in a different fashion. Whether or not you want to view that as just chromatic or drawn from the melodic and harmonic minor scale, I mean, that's up to you and such, but those are the tools, so you can take them and make some sick shit with them, man. Guys, if you appreciated this video and liked this video, I'd very much like it if you could check out a new song that I put out on Spotify a while ago. It's called Telestial Fray. You can find it by typing in spikessignal on Spotify, Apple Music, all that stuff, just like you see here on YouTube. And if you let me know what you think of it, I would appreciate it. So, till next time, guys, I'll see you right here at the Spike Signal. Thank you.